Good morning. My name is David Pike, and I'm president of Witherspoon Rose Culture, and it's a pleasure to have y'all here this morning to talk about pruning. It's one of the most critical things that you can do to your roses. It helps to determine your production for this coming season, and it's an opportunity for you to shape your plant if it's been unruly during the last year, if it's been growing the wrong way, catching you while you walk by it. Now's the time to whip it in shape and make it behave. And we tried to make this very simple and straightforward. My father-in-law, Bob Witherspoon, started the company in '51 and developed a schedule, a plan for how to maintain roses. And what he found is if you want to be successful with them, there's certain things that you need to do each year. Pruning is one of those things. And then you need to be consistent with your care. That is one of the biggest things in roses, is being consistent. It's not rocket science. It's just being consistent, finding a plan that you're comfortable with and following through with that plan, even if you don't want to be out there that day. You know, your roses need that attention. So be consistent. And I always like to tell people if it's their first time with growing roses or been a while, start out small. Don't go and put 400, 500 bushes in your backyard, and never have done it. We want you to be successful. But the first thing in January that we suggest doing to all roses is an application of a dormant spray. And that we do in January, and if people have had severe problems with black spot in the previous year, we recommend doing it 2 times during January. If you haven't done your dormant spray, it's not too late to do it. I would wait until after you've pruned, then go home and prune your bushes and then apply the dormant spray. The dormant spray does 2 things. It helps to defoliate the plant. Sometimes our winters are not cold enough to defoliate the plants, and so we have to force them into a dormancy. This year, December was pretty much cold enough to defoliate the plants, and they dropped their foliage very well, which was good. But if there was black spot on that foliage, or you had it during the year, it still lingers on the cane, and wherever those leaves fell, the black spots are there and were released into the soil, just waiting for this nice warm weather to start creeping back in, and it'll reinfect your plant. So we encourage you to spray the bush and then the ground wherever you might have had the leaves. There's a pocket of leaves right there, so we'd want to spray the mulch also in order to control that black spot. So it's important to do that, but it's not too late if you haven't already done that to do it, but I would wait until after pruning. One of the main questions we have about pruning is there's some guide information in your handout about pruning, and it's on page 7. It talks about pruning and the principles and what we're going to do this morning. One of the first things people ask is, when do I know it's time to prune? Typically, the bushes at this time of year haven't leafed out as much, but whenever you see a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of new growth, this is all new growth, then it's showing you that they've come out of dormancy and they're ready to be pruned. So now it's very easy to see, is it time to prune? Yes. So you want to get out there and do this pruning now. The principles that we'll talk about are the same for floribundas. These are floribundas in through here. Tree roses that we have on either side of the garden there. The one behind you has already been pruned. It was pruned early. It's good for hybrid teas, grandifloras, climbing roses. All your roses need this type of pruning each year, including your knockouts. Please do not neglect your knockouts. They're roses, and they definitely need a good pruning every year, as do all of your roses. Roses become less productive if we don't prune them. They'll just get bigger and bigger, the stems will get smaller and smaller, and the flowers will get smaller, and the plants will get spindlier. If you will read in the Bible, John chapter 15, verses 1 through 6, you'll see the importance of pruning. You cannot produce fruit if you don't get pruned. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to prune so that we get fruit, abundant fruit. And that's what we want from the roses. We want abundant fruit. So that's what we're going to be doing. In here, we're going to look at two plants, and I'm going to talk about what we're cutting out. Typically, you want to cut out spindly growth, thin canes that aren't producing. You want to cut out dead or diseased wood. Canes that are crossing each other, that are rubbing up against each other. You want to eliminate them from the plant because that can cause problems during the growing season. And one thing my father-in-law taught me when I first started pruning was to envision an empty ice cream cone. You want to look at your plant and try to see an empty ice cream cone, and you want to prune so that you leave all the canes basically on the outside and open up the center of the plant. You want to create a better airflow. With all these canes that are in here, the airflow is not like it should be, and that's just part of the nature of the plant. And so we want to open it back up so we get good airflow, which will help decrease our insect and disease problems this coming spring. So I'll walk through this with you, and if you have questions, do not hesitate to ask while we're going along. The tools that you need are fairly basic. A good pair of gloves. Typically we don't have these type of nice warm days where you can get out and prune without a heavy jacket. You just need your long sleeve shirt and some good gloves. And then you need a pair of good bypass clippers. Bypass meaning the blades are bypassing each other. So the other type of clippers are anvil, and that's where metal is hitting metal, and that's going to crush your stems. That you don't want to use those on your roses. Those are better suited for cutting artificial flowers, artificial trees, artificial plants, artificial stuff. They're not suited for live plants. When you cut live plants, you want to get a good clean cut so you don't damage your canes. And with the bypass clippers, you get that good clean cut. Felco makes a good pair. They're a little pricey. Corona makes a good pair. You can spend $9 to $90 just depending on what you wanted, what your budget is. The main thing is get a good pair and keep them sharp. Okay, so here's our plant here. This is a marmalade sky, I think it is, and there's a lot of growth in here. And so you want to come in and remove the inside growth. And so I'm going to make some cuts that I'll and then go back and change some things. But first of all, you want to come in and open up the center. So I'm cleaning out the center of this plant so that we can see what's going on in there. Cutting out smaller canes that just didn't produce last year and won't produce this year. Here's a spindly one. Spindly, is just a little thin cane, not doing much, and it's not going to produce much. So canes that are going straight into the center, you want to eliminate, like these two. And if this was your home garden, you could unmound your roses, spread all that out, and mound, and go ahead and prune down to the base. Just be sure to mound them back up because winter's not over. We're going to get a snow. We're going to get some ice. It's going to happen. We know it. If you've lived in North Carolina very long, it's going to happen. So go ahead and unmound them while you prune, and then you can mound it back up afterwards. Or you can just prune to the mound and then finish up pruning later in the season once the threat of frost is passed. So here we go. This one's growing straight into the center. Sometimes you got to cut some big canes, but it's going to benefit us in the long run. It's going to produce stronger canes for us this spring. Here again, there's another spindly little cane that's just not going to produce. And you see that I'm opening up the center of the plant Can you start to see the ice cream cone starting to form? We're going to reduce down to about 4 or 5 strong canes and opening up the center. So here's another one that's growing right in the center that we want to eliminate, and opening up the center. Even though it's a strong, good, healthy cane, we've got several good canes to help fill in the gap and produce strong canes for us this coming spring. This pruning is going to push all the energy back into the plant, to the base of the plant, to the bud union, and that's where you want it to go. It's going to slow up the growth process, which is fine because it's a little early to be leafed out this far. We're doing a couple things with this pruning. In the final cut, I'm going to look at being about 24 to 30 inches from the base of the ground. So that's kind of where we look to go. You can do lower. When I first started in April of '79, my father-in-law had us pruning down to 18 inches, and I was going, we're killing these plants, we're killing them. And I was just going, I just thought, this is crazy. But I trusted him and did what he said, and they survived. What we've learned is that doing that, it creates a stronger bush. You get a lot of new canes from the very base of the plant, which is great, but it takes so much longer to get up to a good size plant where you can cut long stems. So we've adjusted our height somewhat so that we get that growth coming from the base of the plant, which is what you want to see, but also giving us some height so we can have some longer stems a little bit earlier in the season. Now, one of the things you want to look for to eliminate is canker. Canker is a fungus that occurs. There's no control for it except cutting it out of your plant. You'll see a purplish section on your cane, a brownish look about it, and when you see that, you want to cut below that, and you want to keep cutting until you get a clean pith, clean center of your cane. It should have a light green tint to it if the canker is gone. And I've got a canker here, so I'm going to cut below this canker and those other shoots. Oops, bad news. There's the canker. You can see the canker on the plant, on that stem. And can you see in the center of that? That's not good. So we got to go down further. So we're going to have to eliminate there. It's getting clearer. Sometimes you have to take them almost all the way down. Yeah, this one's going to have to go all the way down. It's still in there. And what that means is in there dormant, and it's going to come out at some point, and it's going to kill that whole cane. It's better to get this cancer out now than wait until it's blooming, and then midsummer you go, "Why's my cane dying?" And you call us and go, my bush is dying. And we talk you through, calm down, it's okay. We're going to work through it and get that canker out of there. So do it now while you can, and it's easier. It won't be so hard to do it later. Now. Yep. There's still just a tad bit left. Yeah, I'm going to have trouble getting my clippers in there to get this last bit. We'll see if we can get a clean cut. It's kind of tricky. Okay. I just can't get quite past that last little bit of the cane. It's a little better. It's almost out. We'll have to watch that cane. But we should be okay for this year, this season. So there's still just a tad left, but we'll call it good this year. So we want to continue eliminating any and here's a piece of canker here. You can see that starting there. Hopefully it won't be very deep. Oops. It's deep. It's a good one. So we'll come on down There we go. Clean. That's good. That's what you want to see when you get that final cut. It's a little lower than what we wanted, but that's okay. It's okay. And so because of that, I'm going to bring the whole thing down a little bit lower than I normally would. When you make that final cut for the height, you want to focus on having a shoot that's pointing away from the center of the plant. So like this one is pointing away from the center. It's going out that way. This one right here is coming in towards the center. So you want to cut so that things are growing out from the center. You don't want to crowd it up. So you want to make sure you're opening it up even more. So that's going to be where my final cut's going to be. And you can do it on the side, so it'll go this way, and this is where I'm going to, let's see, we've got a bud eye coming there and one there. Probably will take this higher one because it's going away from the center, and I'm going to cut at an angle so that water's not going to have the opportunity to puddle there. And let's see, make this final cut right there. These look healthy and strong, so I'm going to make my cuts there. And something like this, you know, you've got these canes that fork. I would take the smaller one out first and eliminate that one if we need it, and then make my final cut there again, right above the bud eye. It's going out away from the center of the plant. Cleaning up more. We've got two other spots. I've got some canker, and we'll check those out once I make this last cut here. So we're going to cut below this canker, see if we got, no. So this one's going to come down, which actually is good because we got this knot here. When a new growth appears, you've got 3 shots at a bloom. So that this one, the primary one's going to come out first. If we get a frost or freeze, that one will die. But then there are 2 other buds that can come out from that and produce a flower. And sometimes they do that and produce flowers, and then you get these knots like that because you get a cane that'll grow up. And at some point, you just have to eliminate them because you get this big knot, and it's okay to eliminate them. So there, we didn't have to cut much to remove that, which is good. And see what we got here on this one. There we go, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this one down a little bit, just so it's not so awkward looking and having so out of whack. So it's a little lower, but can you see the ice cream cone? Squint and you can see it. But there it is. So, any questions on that before we move to the next one?
So it's okay to cut right down to
the bud union?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sometimes you have to. It's hard to do that. You don't want to do it, but it's better to go ahead and do that instead of letting it linger throughout the year. And like I said, 30 inches is just what we aim for. If you have to go lower, it's okay. At our home, we have David Austin roses, some of his roses at the back of our garden, and they're vigorous growers, and we want visually for the eye to stop at the back of the garden. And so for that reason, we prune those at 4 feet high, so they'll start out bigger, flush. And so people say, oh, there's the back of the garden right there. So you can work with your plant depending on your location of what you've got going on in your landscape. This process is good for miniatures, like I mentioned earlier, although miniatures are harder to, well, they're not harder, they're just lower to the ground, and you just have to be more diligent. You have a lot more cuts to make. Principle same for your grandifloras, knockouts, you want to do this too. Your climbers, if you have climbing varieties, there again, the principle is the same. My final cut would match my arbor. So if my arbor was 18 feet tall, this last shot cut would have been about 16 feet, so that the canes could grow and meet each other, or we could go to the top or fan out. So the principles are the same. It's just the length of the stem makes the difference on a climbing variety. The only ones you would not prune like this now would be your spring blooming only climbers. Most people don't have those because they just bloom one time in the spring. If you have that in your garden, you want to prune that after it blooms, but the principles would be the same. And those varieties typically are antique type varieties. Okay, so we're going to do this one. I'm not going to talk as much on this. I'm just going to go ahead and get the pruning done, cutting out some of these smaller canes, opening it up so I can see, and just eliminating some things. I see a piece of dead. I think it's fairly obvious that you can see the dead, and of course we'll remove that. Once you do it enough, you can get very quick with it. It doesn't take you very long to do it. And when I first learned, I was working with a gentleman named Oz. And he would get on to me because I would sit there and make all these little cuts. And then he said, just cut it right there, David. I went, yes, sir. And so, you know, I make one cut instead of 5 separate cuts. And I went, gotcha. So I learned, you know, we're just going to go through and look at it and then cut appropriately so that you don't have to make so many extra little cuts, if possible. But, you know, it's a learning process. And you know what? Your roses are going to forgive you. They're not going to say, oh, you hurt me. Please don't prune me. You know, God doesn't say that. We don't say that to God. Oh, don't prune me. No, we want to be pruned. We want to produce fruit. And your roses, they desire to produce fruit. They so want to please us. So don't think this is brutal. It's for their benefit. We all need pruning, and even though it's challenging and hurtful at times, we all need it.
Do we need to do this like right now, or do
Yes.
we have like 2 weeks?
The sooner the better, because I would go ahead and get it done now. It's the ideal time. You generally want to see a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of new growth, and it's in the material there. Once you see a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of new growth, then you know the plant has come out of dormancy, and it's time to prune. And this will slow it down, so it'll get more in tune with what's going on in the environment. So I'm just gonna. I get to where I want, you know, I go overboard. I like to have them all the same size. That's not always necessary, but I just like that look. So there's another one that didn't have much canker in it. They're all nice and clean. You don't have to clean your clippers after each cut unless you come across cane gall. Gall will be this funny, gnarly looking growth on the cane or on the bud union. It'll break apart easily, kind of looks like a little brain. It's just kind of this gnarly thing. You don't see it often, but if you do see that, and you cut it with your clippers, you do want to clean that off. Wipe it with alcohol wipes, something like that, to disinfect. But as a general rule, most people can just go through and not have to do that. But, you know, this might seem harsh, but it's good for the plant. It's going to produce some big flowers for us this spring that you can share and enjoy with your friends. That's what it's all about.